حي على الفلاح.
All their eyes were on Yusuf. One of the ladies gasped, "Good gracious." Another whispered, "This is not a mortal being." Another stammered, patting her hair, "This is but a noble angel." The wife of Al-Aziz, confident and haughty, said to her guests triumphantly, "That is the one about whom you blamed me, and I certainly sought to seduce him, but he firmly refused." And changing to a menacing tone, she added, "And if he will not do what I order him, he will surely be imprisoned and will be of those debased." Yusuf stood before the wealthiest, most elegant ladies of the capital in all the purity of his innocent young manhood, with a face more beautiful than any in this world, and he called upon his Creator, "My Lord, prison is more to my liking than that to which they invite me, and if you do not avert me from their plan, I might incline towards them and thus be of the ignorant." Therefore, Allah answered his invocation. That evening, Zulaykha convinced her husband that the only way to save her honor was to put Yusuf in prison. Otherwise, she would not be able to control herself or to safeguard her prestige. The chief minister knew Yusuf was absolutely innocent, that he was a young man of honor, a loyal servant, and he loved him for these reasons. It was not an easy decision for him to put an innocent man behind bars. However, he was left with no choice. He reasoned that Yusuf's honor would also be safeguarded if he was kept out of Zulaykha's sight. That night, with a heavy heart, the chief minister sent Yusuf to prison. It is evident from Qur'anic accounts that Yusuf alayhi salam, by now a prophet, receiving revelations and inspirations from Allah, he now began to carry out his divinely appointed mission inside the prison walls. Allah said, "And there entered the prison with him 2 youths. It is said that one of them used to pour the king wine. His name was Nabwa. The other youth was his baker. His name was Majlath." When they met Yusuf alayhi salam in the prison, they were impressed by his manners, righteousness, actions, speech, the prayers he offered often, and his kind treatment to others. Each one of them saw a dream related to their lives, and both wanted its interpretations. The exegetes said that both of the youths had their dreams on the same night. As for the one who used to pour wine to the king, he saw 3 vines laden with ripe grapes. He took them and pressed them into the king's cup and provided him the drink. As for the baker, he saw 3 baskets of breads on his head, and wild birds were eating from the top of the basket. Yusuf alayhi salam said, "I will inform you of the meaning of these dreams before your next meal is served." And to assure his listeners that he would not give the interpretation from himself, he added, "That is from what my Lord has taught me." By his words, Yusuf assured his 2 listeners that he would do what they had requested of him within a given time frame. But before doing so, he put before them the outlines of the pure faith of his fathers in an attempt to make them examine their own beliefs. He did this by explaining to them what he believed and what he did not, referring to the fact that he and his forefathers had steadfastly rejected the ascribing of any partner to Allah. Yusuf alayhi salam carefully and wisely informed his companions that false gods have no substance, and explaining the omnipotence of Allah, trying with evidences and arguments granted him by his Lord to turn them away from idolatry and shirk. When he had fulfilled his duty of calling them to the way of Allah, he gave them the interpretations of their dreams. To the cupbearer who dreamt he was pressing wine, Yusuf alayhi salam said that he would pour wine for his master. As for the baker who dreamt of birds eating bread from his head, Yusuf alayhi salam said that he would be crucified and birds shall eat from his head. And to convince the man that his fate was unchangeable and sealed, and that he must now come to terms with it and prepare for the meeting of his Lord, he added, "The matter has been decreed, about which you both inquire." Yusuf alayhi salam approached the companion whom he supposed would be saved and asked him to mention him to his master, who perhaps may already be familiar with Yusuf alayhi salam due to the wide publicity of the affair of the women. He hoped the master, the king, would look into his case, see his oppression, and free him. In due course, the cupbearer was released from prison, as Yusuf alayhi salam had foretold. But as Allah had willed, Shaitan caused the cupbearer to forget Yusuf alayhi salam's request to mention him to the king, and hence Yusuf alayhi salam remained in prison for a few more years. At this time, the king of Egypt had a dream. He sees himself on the banks of the Nile River. The water is receding before him, becoming mere mud. The fish begin to skip and jump in the mud. Indeed, I have seen in a dream 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 that were lean, and 7 green spikes of grain, and others that were dry. O eminent ones, explain to me my vision, if you should interpret visions. The king awoke frightened, shocked, and depressed, not knowing what all this meant. He sent for the sorcerers, priests, and ministers, and told them his dream. The sorcerers said, "This is a mixed-up dream. How can any of that be? It is a nightmare." The priests said, "Perhaps His Majesty had a heavy supper." The chief minister said, "Could it be that His Majesty was exposed and did not draw the blanket up at night?" The king's jester said jokingly, "His Majesty is beginning to grow old, and so his dreams are confused." They reached a unanimous conclusion that it was only a bad dream. When the cupbearer, who had been in prison with Yusuf, heard about the king's dream, he recalled the man who had correctly interpreted his own dreams years earlier in prison. He remembered Yusuf. He ran to the king to tell him about Yusuf, who was the only one capable to interpreting the dream. The cupbearer said, "He had asked me to remember him to you, but I forgot." He volunteered to provide an interpretation of the dream and asked to be sent to see Yusuf. He returned to the prison. He found the one he sought and addressed him with respect that he realized was due to him. He narrated the dream to Yusuf alayhi salam and requested its meaning so he may return to the people of the court for them to know. From the springs of wisdom and knowledge that Allah had granted him, Yusuf alayhi salam disclosed the meaning of the dream to the cupbearer. "You will plant for 7 years consecutively, and what you harvest leave in its spikes, except a little, from which you will eat. Then will come after that 7 difficult years, which will consume what you saved for them, except a little, from which you will store. Then will come after that a year, in which the people will be given rain, and in which they will press olives and grapes." The king was greatly astonished. Who could this person be? He commanded that Yusuf be set free from prison and presented to him at once. The king's envoy went to fetch him immediately, but Yusuf alayhi salam's response to the king's messenger, who came to release him from prison, was totally unexpected by the king. Yusuf alayhi salam refused to leave prison and insisted that the messenger return to the king and ask him about the case of the women who cut their hands. "Indeed, my lord is knowing of their plan," he added. To noble Yusuf alayhi salam, there were 2 considerations far more important than freedom. The first was that his integrity and innocence should be established beyond any doubt by clearing him of guilt in the matter of Zulaykha and her companions. Second, Yusuf alayhi salam needed an assurance that if he left prison, he would not continue to be harassed by the highly placed women of the city, and by Zulaykha in particular. If one or both of these conditions were not met, he preferred to remain in prison. Yusuf alayhi salam respectfully demanded that the king investigate the affair of the women who cut their hands. The king became curious and summoned the wife of Al-Aziz and her associates for questioning. The women's response was immediate and spontaneous. They cleared him of all the evil charges against him previously. They said, "Perfect as Allah. We know about him no evil." The wife of the minister then added her testimony. "Now the truth has become evident. It was I who sought to seduce him, and indeed, he is of the truthful." For the aristocratic Zulaykha, this public confession of her blameworthiness was no doubt the ultimate act of penance and abasement. Earlier, she had defended herself in front of the other women, but during the intervening years, she had reflected upon her own actions and upon the absolutely unwavering integrity and purity of the man who she had deliberately set out to ruin. Yusuf's request to the king to clear the matter of the women was so that his former master Al-Aziz will know that Yusuf was not a betrayer and that his Lord does not guide the scheming of betrayers. Once his innocence was established, Yusuf alayhi salam appeared before the king. After hearing Yusuf alayhi salam's words, the king became even more impressed and entrusted him to a position of high rank. Yusuf advised the king to start planning for years of famine ahead. He informed him that the famine would affect not only Egypt, but the neighboring countries as well. The king offered him a high position. Yusuf asked to be made controller of the granaries so that he could guard the nation's harvest and thereby safeguard it during the anticipated drought. By this, Yusuf did not mean to seize an opportunity or personal gain. He merely wanted to rescue hungry nations for a period of 7 years. It was a sheer nobleness in his part, and that he wanted to ensure that many people would not die as a result. And thus, Yusuf alayhi salam was made the chief minister of Egypt, bearing the title of Al-Aziz, the highest official in the land after the king. Yusuf alayhi salam proclaimed his Lord's message and established a just law based on Allah's commands. In addition to this, he stored up the country's grain during the first 7 years of plenty, except that portion that the people ate. Yusuf ruled the people of Egypt with justice, and the people, men and women, loved him. It is said that when Yusuf met the king, he was only 30 years old. The king then addressed him using 70 languages, and Yusuf replied to each one. This impressed the king greatly, especially since Prophet Yusuf was so young. The people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, say that the king admired Yusuf and thus put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. He also gave him his ring, made him wear silk, put a gold chain around his neck, and took him around in his other means of transport. His people yelled out in front of him, "You are our master, king." The king said to Yusuf, "I am not greater than you, except in terms of the throne." Allah said, "And thus we firmly established Yusuf in the land, with the authority to do therein as he pleased." This refers to the stage after coming out of the prison, hardship, and trials. He then became virtually the ruler of Egypt. Wherever he went, he was honored. Allah said, "We bestow our mercy on whomever we please, and we leave not to waste the reward of the good doers. And surely the reward of the hereafter is better for those who believe and are always pious." The young boy betrayed and thrown into the well was now established as the chief minister of Egypt. His patience and perseverance, and above all, his total submission to the will of Allah, had already resulted in great reward. Yusuf alayhi salam knew, however, that the greatest reward for patience and righteousness would be in the hereafter.